The grave soil was still wet when he arrived. Not even a full day had passed since they lowered Lord Fenmore into the cold ground. The black mourning wreaths were still hanging on the front door of Fenmore House. The candles inside had not yet burned down. The maids were still moving quietly through the halls with red eyes and trembling hands, and Lady Drusilla Fenmore was sitting alone in the parlour, still in her mourning clothes, still holding the folded prayer card from the burial service, when the doors opened without a knock. He walked in like the house already belonged to him. Caius Greyhollow, Duke of Thornfeld, did not remove his coat. He did not bow. He stood in the middle of that grief-filled room, looked at the widow sitting before him, and without a single word of sympathy, without even the courtesy of waiting for her to stand, he spoke. Low, steady,
The matter is
like a man reading from a contract he had
Your
already
silence
signed.
will not alter it.
Your
A
womb is
wise
mine
choice
until I
is
have my
required.
sons. Drusilla did not move. The prayer card crinkled slowly in her tightening grip. Now I want to ask you something honestly. What does a woman do when the world has just taken everything from her, and the very next thing to walk through her door is a man like that? Comment your answer below and tell us what part of the world you are joining us from today. If this story is already pulling at something in you, please subscribe. This is only the beginning. The morning her husband was buried, Lady Drusilla Fenmore did not cry. Not because she felt nothing, but because the moment Lord Fenmore's coffin touched the ground, she felt the weight of 17 lives settle onto her shoulders, and grief was a luxury she could not afford. 17 people, 6 house staff, 4 farm hands, 3 tenant families with small children, a groundskeeper named Old Pert who had worked the Fenmore land since before she was born, and her husband's widowed sister, Aunt Beatrice, who had nowhere else in the world to go. 17 lives. 1 widow, no money. The estate was in debt. Not a little. Not the kind of debt you quietly manage with careful budgeting and a good harvest. Lord Fenmore had borrowed heavily, secretly, from men who did not lend out of kindness. Drusilla had found the ledgers herself 3 nights before the funeral, when she could not sleep and went looking for the household accounts. She sat at her late husband's writing desk by candlelight, turning page after page, and with each number her face grew more still, not more distressed, just still. The way a person's face goes still when they understand, fully and finally, that the thing they feared is already here. She had not told Aunt Beatrice. She had not told the staff. She dressed the next morning, went to the church, stood at the graveside in the cold wind, and kept her eyes forward. What she did not know, standing there at that grave, was that someone else already knew. Someone who had known long before she did. Someone who had, in fact, been waiting. The first sign came before the mourners had even left. Drusilla was standing near the parlour window, accepting murmured condolences from the vicar's wife, when she noticed the carriage on the road. It was not moving slowly out of respect for the house, in mourning. It was stopped, deliberately. The horses were still, and the crest on the carriage door was visible even from that distance, dark and angular against the pale afternoon light. She knew that crest. Everyone in the county knew it. The Duke of Thornfeld did not attend funerals. He did not call on neighbours. He did not, under any ordinary circumstance, stop his carriage on the road outside a grieving widow's estate and wait. And yet there it was. Drusilla excused herself from the vicar's wife, walked to the window and looked out directly. She did not step back when she realized the carriage had not moved because its occupant was looking at the house. Looking at the house, the way you look at something you are deciding when to enter. Is everything all right, my lady? Her head housekeeper, Mrs. Pottle, appeared at her elbow. Close the front curtains, Drusilla said quietly. Mrs. Pottle blinked. My lady? The front curtains. Close them, please. The carriage stayed on the road for 20 more minutes. Then it turned and left. That night, the letter arrived, not delivered by the postal service, carried by a man on horseback, who handed it directly to the footman at the door, waited while the footman carried it inside, and then rode away without a word. The letter was sealed with black wax and bore no name on the outside. Drusilla opened it alone at the writing desk, the same desk where she had discovered the ledgers, and she read it once, carefully, from beginning to end. Then she read it again. The letter was from the Duke of Thornfeld's legal counsel. It was written in the formal, bloodless language that lawyers use when they want to say something terrible without appearing to feel anything about it. It informed her, in 4 precise paragraphs, that the late Lord Fenmore had borrowed a sum of money from the Duke of Thornfeld 6 years ago, secured against the Fenmore estate and all its holdings, that the loan had never been repaid, that the interest accumulated over 6 years had grown the debt to a figure that made Drusilla's hand tighten slowly on the paper, and that the Duke, in his patience, had elected not to call in the debt during Lord Fenmore's lifetime. That patience, the letter said, had now expired. There was a final paragraph. It was shorter than the others. It said simply that the Duke would call on Lady Fenmore in 3 days' time to discuss the terms of settlement, and that she should make herself available. Not could she be available, should, as though the matter of whether she had a choice had already been decided before the letter was written. She sat for a long time in the dark after the candle burned low. When she finally stood, she was not shaking. She walked to the fireplace, looked at the letter in her hand, and placed it on the mantel instead of burning it, because she needed to read it again in the morning with clear eyes and be absolutely certain she had understood every word. She had. 3 days passed. Drusilla spent them in motion. She wrote to her late husband's solicitor in the city and received a reply that confirmed what she already feared. There was no hidden inheritance, no overlooked account, no quietly held asset she had not known about. Lord Fenmore had spent everything and borrowed more. The solicitor's letter was apologetic in tone and entirely useless in substance. She met with old Pert and told him, without drama, that the coming weeks might be difficult and that she needed him to keep the farmhand steady and working. Old Pert looked at her with his weathered eyes for a long moment, and then said, "Whatever you need, my lady, we're not going anywhere." She told Mrs. Pottle the same. Mrs. Pottle did not ask questions, which was one of the things Drusilla valued most about her. She did not tell Aunt Beatrice. On the morning of the 3rd day, she was up before the sun. She dressed without her maid's help. She went to the kitchen, poured herself tea from the pot the cook had already set on the stove, and stood at the kitchen window, watching the frost on the garden begin to soften as the light came up. The cook, a broad woman named Hesse, who had been with the Fenmore household for 11 years, pretended to be very busy with her bread dough and said nothing, but twice she refilled Drusilla's cup without being asked. At 10 o'clock, the carriage arrived. It was not the same one she had seen on the road 3 days ago. This one was larger, and it came with 4 outriders. It pulled through the Fenmore gates at a pace that suggested it had never in its life been made to hurry for anyone, and it stopped in front of the house with the kind of deliberate precision that communicated, without a word being spoken, that the man inside it was accustomed to the world arranging itself around him. Drusilla was already in the parlour when Mrs. Pottle showed him in. she did not stand. This was a choice, and she made it consciously. She was sitting in the chair nearest the fireplace, the one that had always been called the mistress's chair, and she stayed in it, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes on the door, as Caius Greyhollow, Duke of Thornfeld, walked through it. He was not what people expected when they imagined a ruthless man. Ruthless men in stories were usually loud about it. This one was not loud at all. He was tall, broad-shouldered, somewhere in his late 30s, with dark eyes that moved around the room when he entered, the way a soldier's eyes move, quickly and thoroughly, cataloguing everything before settling. He wore no excess. His coat was fine, but without ornament. He carried no cane, no hat, no gloves in hand to signal ease or leisure. He looked like a man who had stripped away everything unnecessary and kept only what worked. He looked at the room. He looked at her. She looked back. "Lady Fenmore," he said. "Your Grace," she replied. Her voice was even. He did not sit. He stood near the center of the room, which meant she had to look up at him, and she had the distinct impression that this was not accidental. "You received my letter," he said. "Your counsel's letter," she corrected, quietly. Something moved across his face, not quite amusing, something adjacent to it. He clasped his hands behind his back. "The debt is real," he said. "I know it is." "Then you understand the situation." "I understand that my husband made a private arrangement with you 6 years ago and chose not to tell me," she said. "I understand that the arrangement was very much in your favor, and that you have chosen to present it at the earliest possible moment after his death. I understand these things, yes." His expression did not change, but his eyes sharpened slightly. She got the impression he had expected something different from her. Tears, perhaps, pleading, some version of helplessness. "What I would like to understand," she continued, "is what you actually want. The letter spoke of settlement. I am here. Speak plainly." He looked at her for a moment, and then something in his posture shifted. Not much, just enough. He unclenched his hands from behind his back and let them rest at his sides. "I want heirs," he said. 2 sons, specifically. My previous wife gave me none before she died. I am 38 years old, and I have no patience left for the usual process of courtship. You are young enough. You are healthy, by all appearances, and your husband's debt gives me a legal claim to everything on this estate, which means you have very limited room to refuse me." The room was entirely silent. "You are proposing marriage," Drusilla said. "I am stating terms," he said. "Marriage is the legal structure through which the terms are fulfilled. You will come to Thornfeld. You will remain there until you have given me 2 living sons. At that point, the debt is cancelled, the estate is returned to you in full, and you may do as you wish." Drusilla did not speak for a long moment. The fire crackled behind her. Outside, a bird called once and went quiet. "And if I refuse?" she asked. "Then I call in the debt by Friday," he said. "And everyone on this property loses everything they have." He said it without cruelty, without pleasure, completely flatly, the way a man states a fact about the weather. And that, somehow, was the most frightening part of all. She looked at him. This man standing in the middle of her parlor, this man who had come to her on the day after her husband's burial with a contract dressed up as a proposal, and she felt something move through her chest that was not fear and was not surrender and was not grief. It was something older and harder and quieter than any of those things. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing it. "I will need it until tomorrow morning," she said. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he inclined his head once, the smallest possible acknowledgement, turned, and walked out of the room. She did not move until she heard the front door close. Then she closed her eyes, let out a breath slowly, and opened them again. 17 lives, and a duke who had just told her, without saying the words directly, exactly what he meant. Her womb was his until he had his sons. She understood perfectly. Drusilla did not sleep that night. She sat at the writing desk and she thought, and she wrote, and she crossed things out and wrote them again. Not because she was confused about what she was going to do. She had known within 10 minutes of him leaving the parlor what her answer would be. She sat through the night because she needed to be sure she was going in with her eyes fully open, and because some decisions, even the ones you have already made, deserve the respect of being thought through completely before you commit to them. Aunt Beatrice found her there at midnight. She stood in the doorway in her sleeping cap and robe, looking at her niece by marriage with the quiet alarm of someone who suspects things are worse than they have been told. "Drusilla," she said, "go back to bed, Beatrice." "I am not going back to bed. Tell me what is happening." So Drusilla told her. Not all of it, not the most precise details, but enough. The debt, the duke, the terms. She told it plainly and without drama, and when she finished, Aunt Beatrice sat down in the nearest chair and pressed both her hands over her mouth, and was silent for a long time. Then she said, "You cannot." "I can," Drusilla said. "He is asking you to give him children. He is asking you to be his vessel. He is treating you like a brood mare." "Yes," Drusilla said. "He is. And in exchange, 17 people keep their homes and their livelihoods and their lives, and you keep yours. So I am going to say yes." "You cannot," Beatrice said again, but quieter this time, and this time it was not a statement of impossibility. It was grief. "Help me make a list of what I need to take," Drusilla said. Beatrice looked at her for a long time. Then, slowly, she stood, went to the desk, and picked up the pen. Drusilla arrived at Thornfeld Castle 4 days later. She had expected a cold. The Duke was a cold man. It seemed reasonable to expect a cold house. But Thornfeld surprised her. It was large, certainly, and formal, and everything about it communicated generations of wealth and authority. But it was not neglected. The grounds were maintained. The stone was clean. The windows were real glass, not the clouded, rattling sort you found in houses where money had run out. There were flowers in the entry hall, fresh ones, and a fire already lit in the room they showed her to. The housekeeper at Thornfeld was a woman named Mrs. Quill. She was approximately 60 years old, small and precise, with silver hair and steady hands, and a manner that communicated absolute competence without warmth or coldness in either direction. She showed Drusilla to her rooms, told her that dinner was served at 7, and that the Duke would meet with her in the library at 9 the following morning to discuss the household arrangements. "He will meet with me," Drusilla repeated. "Yes, my lady. Not instruct me. Meet with me." Mrs. Quill looked at her with the faintest adjustment of expression. "That is the word he used, my lady. Meet." Drusilla unpacked her own things, which she preferred, and when her lady's maid, a young woman named Greta, who had insisted on coming, despite Drusilla telling her she did not have to, tried to help, Drusilla let her unpack the heavier trunk and sent her to explore the kitchens and make friends with the Thornfeld staff. Intelligence about a household always began in the kitchens. She stood at the window of her room as the afternoon faded and looked out at the Thornfeld land. It was extensive, rolling, dark green hills stretching out toward a line of trees in the distance, sheep on the far slope, A gardener moving along the south wall below, doing something methodical with a rake. A normal house. People doing normal things. And somewhere inside these walls, the Duke of Thornfeld was doing whatever it was he did in the hours before dinner. She wondered what that looked like. Whether he sat still, or moved through the house, or read, or worked. She told herself it did not matter, and turned away from the window. Dinner was not what she had expected, either. She had expected to eat alone, or to eat with the Duke in the kind of rigid silence that said everything about power and nothing about human warmth. Instead, she arrived in the dining room at 7 to find 3 other people already seated. The first was a man of about 50, with a round, open face and spectacles that had slid slightly down his nose. He was introduced as Mr. Brevel, the Duke's estate steward, who apparently dined with the family on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He stood when she entered, smiled without apparent nervousness, and said he was very glad to meet her. The second was a young woman of perhaps 20, with sharp eyes and a posture so correct it looked almost defiant. Her name was Miss Otley. She was the daughter of a neighbouring estate, and was apparently a friend of the household in some capacity that was not immediately explained. She studied Drusilla with frank curiosity during the introduction, and said simply, "I wondered what you would be like." "And?" Drusilla asked. "I think I will form a proper opinion later," Miss Otley said, and sat back down. The Duke arrived last. He did not apologize for arriving after everyone else. He took his place at the head of the table, said something brief and courteous to Mr. Bravel about a fencing matter on the north pasture, and then looked at Drusilla. "You settled in well?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "Good." That was the whole of their exchange for the first quarter of dinner. Mr. Brevel carried most of the conversation, pleasantly and without effort, asking Drusilla about the Fenmore land, about whether she found the journey to Thornfeld comfortable, about what she thought of the countryside. She answered him directly, and with genuine interest, because she liked direct people, and Mr. Bravel was very direct in a completely unintimidating way. Miss Otley joined in after the second course, asking sharper questions. Had Drusilla managed the Fenmore estate herself, or left it to the steward? Drusilla said she had managed it together with the steward and sometimes ahead of him. Miss Otley's sharp eyes warmed, just slightly. The Duke listened. He ate. He contributed to conversation with Mr. Bravel when something required his response, but he did not address Drusilla again until near the end of the meal, when the table had grown more relaxed and the conversation had moved to something about the village market. "You will need to know the household," he said, during a pause. Not loudly, but the table went quiet. "I intend to learn it," Drusilla said. "Mrs. Quill will show you whatever you ask to see." "I appreciate that." He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked back at his plate. Mr. Brevel and Miss Otley exchanged the briefest glance. Drusilla caught it and filed it away. The library meeting the next morning was something she had spent a portion of the night preparing for. She had made notes, actual written notes, on a small card she tucked into her sleeve. Not because she was anxious, but because she intended to establish from this first formal exchange that she was not an ornament. The Duke was already there when she arrived, standing at one of the high shelves with a document in his hand. He set it aside when she came in and gestured to the chairs by the table. They sat across from each other in the good morning light, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "I have conditions," Drusilla said. He raised his eyes from the table to her face. "I will fulfill the terms we agreed to," she said. "But I will not do it as a prisoner. I will have access to correspondence. I will write to Beatrice and to Mrs. Pottle at Fenmore freely and without any of my letters being reviewed. I will not be confined to this house or these grounds. I will be treated with the full dignity of my rank, and the staff I brought with me, Greta, will not be reassigned without my agreement." She paused. "Those are my conditions," she said. He looked at her steadily. She did not look away. "Agreed," he said. She had prepared herself for resistance, for negotiation, for the particular kind of condescension that powerful men used when women asked for what was reasonable. His agreement without a single counter came so cleanly that it took her a half-second to absorb it. "That was fast," she said, before she could stop herself. "They were reasonable requests," he said. She studied him. "You were expecting me to make them?" "I was expecting you to have some," he said. "Whether they matched yours specifically, I wasn't sure." He shifted slightly in his chair, and for just a moment, something in his face changed. Not softer, exactly, but less armored. "I don't enjoy this arrangement any more than you do, Lady Fenmore. I would prefer it were otherwise. It is not." She said nothing. She waited. "I need sons," he said. "I need the line to continue. I need to know that when I am gone, what I have spent my life building does not dissolve into nothing because there is no one to take it. That is not cruelty. It is a necessity." "Necessity," she repeated. "Call it what you will." "I call it what it is," she said. "A man who could have asked rather than demanded, who could have come to me differently, who chose not to because he preferred certainty over decency." The silence that followed was not comfortable, but it was not angry either. It was the silence of two people who have said something true and are waiting to see what the truth does to the space between them. "I will earn no more than I deserve," he said, finally. She looked at him carefully. She had expected arrogance in that room. She had expected him to sit across from her the way he had stood in her parlor, a man stating facts, unmoved and unmovable. But there was something in this moment that was different, some small, reluctant thing under the surface that she did not know what to do with yet. She folded her hands on the table. "Then we understand each other," she said. "We understand each other," he agreed. They went over the household arrangements for the next hour with Mrs. Quill, who joined them at the Duke's request, and who Drusilla noticed deferred to the Duke completely, while managing, with great skill, to also actually run the meeting herself. Mrs. Quill was someone worth paying attention to. Drusilla paid attention. By the time she left the library, she had a clear picture of Thornfeld Castle, its schedule, its staff, its tensions, its rhythms. She had learned, without asking directly, that the Duke kept unusual hours and often worked through the night, that he had a younger brother, Lord Prentice Greyhollow, who visited irregularly and was apparently a source of some unspoken strain, that there had been another woman in this house, the first Duchess, who had died 4 years ago, and that no one spoke of her, not because they had been told not to, but because the memory had a shape in the house that people moved carefully around. She walked back to her room, stood at the window again, and looked out at the same hills. Somewhere behind her, in the layers of this house, was a man who had told her exactly what she was here for, and also, in a brief and possibly accidental moment, showed her that he was not entirely what he appeared to be. She did not know what to do with that yet. She knew she would have to figure it out. Outside, the gardener was back at the south wall, still methodical, still unhurried, working the same patch of ground with the patience of someone who understood that things grow in their own time and cannot be forced. Drusilla watched him for a while. Then she went to write a letter to Beatrice. A real one, long and honest, because she had promised herself She would not pretend to the people she loved that everything was fine when it was not. It was not fine. She was inside a bargain she had not chosen, in a house that was not hers, belonging on paper to a man who had purchased her cooperation with the threat of other people's ruin. But she was also, she noticed with some surprise, still herself, completely and stubbornly and entirely herself. And she was beginning to think that was going to matter more than either of them had anticipated. The trouble began on a Tuesday. Drusilla had been at Thornfeld for 11 days, when Lord Prentice Greyhollow arrived without warning, without luggage worth mentioning, and without the courtesy of sending word ahead. She heard the commotion from the upper corridor, looked down over the banister, and saw a man who shared the Duke's height, but none of his stillness, moving through the entry hall like weather coming in sideways. Lord Prentice was 31 years old, handsome in a restless, unfinished way, and he spoke loudly enough that the whole ground floor could hear him telling the footman that he hoped someone had kept his usual room because he intended to stay a while. Mrs. Quill appeared from nowhere, the way Mrs. Quill always appeared, already managing the situation before anyone else had registered. There was one to manage. Drusilla went back to her room and waited. She did not wait long. Within the hour, Greta came to tell her that Lord Prentice had asked the footman who the woman on the upper floor was, and when told she was the new Duchess, had laughed. Not cruelly, but the kind of laugh that meant he found something absurd about the situation, and intended to say so. Drusilla thought about that for a moment. Then she went downstairs to introduce herself properly. She found Lord Prentice in the sitting room off the east corridor, standing at the drinks cabinet with a glass already in hand at 11:30 in the morning. He turned when she entered, looked her over with frank, intelligent eyes, and said, "So you are the widow." "And you are the brother," she replied. He smiled. It was a real smile, wide and a little sharp. "I expected someone older." "I expected someone with luggage," she said. "We are both disappointed." He laughed again, and this time it was genuine amusement, not the dismissive sound she had heard described. He gestured at the chair nearest her. "Sit down. Tell me how my brother talked you into this." "He did not talk me into anything," she said, sitting. "He presented a situation with very limited options, and I chose the one that caused the least harm to the most people." Lord Prentice studied her. "And you are not angry about that?" "I am furious," she said pleasantly. "But fury and good sense are not mutually exclusive." He stared at her for a moment. Then he sat down across from her, set his glass on the side table, and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees in a posture that suggested he had just decided she was worth his full attention. "He is not going to make this easy for you," Prentice said, quieter now. "I know. He does not know how to." He paused, and something shifted in his expression, something older and less performative. He was not always like this. The man you met in your parlour, the one with the terms and the contract, and the complete absence of apology. That is not who he was before Theodora died. Theodora, the first Duchess. The name dropped into the room and changed the temperature. "What happened?" Drusilla asked. Prentice picked up his glass again. She wanted a child more than anything, more than was healthy, more than was safe. The doctors told her after the second loss that another attempt could kill her. Caius told her the same. She tried anyway the third time because she could not accept that she would not give him an heir. She did not survive it. The room was very quiet. "He blames himself," Prentice said. "He should have made different choices," Drusilla said carefully. "Yes, so should she. So should everyone, always, in every situation where someone ends up dead." His voice was flat, but not cold. The point is that he came out of it, believing that he had wanted the heir more than he had protected his wife. And then he spent 4 years turning that into something he could live with, which meant turning himself into a man who simply states requirements and removes feeling from the equation entirely. He looked at her. And then he brought you here. Drusilla sat with that. She turned it over carefully, the way you turn over something fragile, that you are not sure yet whether it helps you or hurts you. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because someone should," Prentice said. "And because you are clearly not stupid, and I would rather you understand what you are dealing with than spend the next year being baffled by a man who has carefully disassembled himself." He picked up his glass, finished it, and set it down with a small click. "Also, I feel guilty. I told him this arrangement was legally sound. I am a little responsible for it existing." Before she could respond, the door opened. The Duke stood in the doorway. He looked at his brother. He looked at Drusilla. His face was absolutely unreadable. "Prentice," he said. "Caius," Prentice replied, leaning back in his chair with the ease of a man who had been getting in trouble with this particular person his entire life and had long since stopped being frightened of it. "I see you have met Lady Fenmore." "We were getting acquainted," Prentice said. "She is considerably more formidable than you made her sound." "I did not describe her at all," the Duke said. "Exactly," Prentice said. The Duke's gaze moved to Drusilla. There was something in it she could not name. Not anger. Not quite. Something that looked almost like concern, which made no sense, and which she decided she had probably imagined. "When you are finished," he said to her, "I would like a word." He left. Prentice watched the door close and then looked at her with an expression that was 1 part sympathy and 2 parts something that looked dangerously like hope. "Formidable," he said again, quietly, as though confirming it to himself. She found the Duke in the library. He was standing at the window when she entered, not looking at the land outside, but at the glass itself, as though he were reading something in his own reflection. "You should not take everything Prentice tells you as reliable," he said, without turning around. "I found him quite direct," she said. "He is direct. He is also dramatic and frequently incorrect about my interior life." She said nothing. She waited, which she had discovered was frequently more effective than speaking. He turned from the window. His face was composed, as it always was, but there were shadows under his eyes that had not been there a week ago, or perhaps she had simply not been looking closely enough before. "I want to be honest with you about something," he said. She kept her expression still. "The arrangement I proposed, the terms, the contract. I am aware that it was not an act of kindness." He stopped, started again. "I am aware that coming to you on the day after your husband's burial was not the behavior of a considerate man. I told myself it was efficient. I told myself you would understand necessity more easily than sentiment." He paused. "I was wrong about the last part." She looked at him carefully. "What changed your thinking?" "You did," he said. "The moment you walked into that library and put conditions on the table." She said nothing. "You were supposed to be frightened," he said, quietly, not cruelly, just honestly. "I was frightened," she said. "I simply did not let it run the meeting." Something moved across his face, fast, and then gone. "I want you to know," he said, "that I will not make this more difficult than it needs to be. You have my word on that." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she said, "Your word is a starting point." He looked at her with those dark, careful eyes. "Fair enough," he said. That evening something happened that none of them had anticipated. Greta came to Drusilla's room just before dinner with a face that said she had information and was not sure whether to be alarmed by it. She had, as instructed, been spending time in the kitchens and with the household staff, and she had learned something that afternoon from one of the Thornfeld footmen, a young man named Bolt, who talked freely when someone paid him genuine attention. There was a woman in the village, Greta said, a woman named Mrs. Halvett. She was a widow herself, the wife of a former Thornfeld land agent who had died 2 years ago, and according to Bolt, Mrs. Halvett had been, for the past 18 months, widely understood among the Thornfeld staff to be the person the Duke visited in the village on Thursday afternoons, under the guise of reviewing estate accounts with her late husband's successor. The estate accounts were reviewed in the Duke's own study on Monday mornings. Drusilla sat with this information for a full minute. Then she said, "Thank you, Greta." "My lady, are you all right?" "Yes," she said. "I am thinking." She was thinking several things at once. She was thinking that she had no claim on this man's private arrangements, that she had come here under a contract, not a love match, and that whatever he had done before she arrived was not her concern. She was thinking that if this arrangement was to produce what he required, certain things would need to change, and she was thinking about whether it was her place to say so. She was thinking about the name Theodora, and the story Prentice had told her, and the shadows under the Duke's eyes, and the way he had said in the library that morning that he had been wrong. She went to dinner. She sat across from the Duke. Lord Prentice was at the table again, and Miss Otley had joined them, which brought the table to 4. The conversation moved along pleasantly enough, and Drusilla was her usual self, direct and present and engaged. But at some point during the second course, she looked across at the Duke and found him looking back at her, and she realized that he had been watching her for some time with an expression she had not seen on him before. It was uncertain. She looked at him steadily, just for a moment, and then she looked away. But her pulse did something she didn't give it permission to do, and she was quietly annoyed with herself for it. After dinner, she didn't go directly to her room. She went to the small sitting room at the end of the south corridor, the one nobody seemed to use, where the fire had burned low and the room was warm and quiet and fully dark except for the glow of the embers. She sat down, and she said, quietly, to no one in particular, "What are you doing, Drusilla?" Nobody answered. The fire settled. She did not have an answer yet. But she was beginning to understand that this house was considerably more complicated than a bargain, and this man was considerably more layered than a contract, and she herself was considerably more invested than a woman with only 17 lives to protect had any safe reason to be. That was the trouble with beginning to see someone clearly. It made everything else much harder. Mrs. Halvett came to Thornfeld on a Wednesday. Drusilla was in the rose garden with old Pert's cousin, a wiry man named Seg, who managed the Thornfeld grounds and had taken to following Drusilla through the garden, giving her unsolicited opinions about every plant, which she genuinely enjoyed. She heard the carriage on the front drive, did not look up immediately, and then Seg went quiet in a way that made her look. The woman stepping down from the carriage was perhaps 35, neat and composed, with a face that had once been very pretty, and was now something better, more settled, more sure of itself. She walked toward the front door with the ease of someone who had walked that path before. "Who is that?" Drusilla asked Seg. Seg became very interested in a rose bush that did not need attention. "That would be Mrs. Halvett, my lady." Drusilla looked at the front door as it opened. Mrs. Quill was there. not the footman. Mrs. Quill herself, which meant she had been watching for the carriage. Drusilla went back to looking at the roses. "What kind of woman is she?" she asked Seg. Seg was quiet for a moment. "Honest," he said finally. "Not unkind." "Good," Drusilla said. She stayed in the garden for another 20 minutes, and then went inside through the side entrance and up to her room. She did not go looking for the Duke. She did not listen at the doors. She wrote a letter to Beatrice, describing the garden and the hills and Seg's passionate opinions about pruning schedules, and she did not mention Mrs. Halvett at all. An hour later, there was a knock at her door. She expected Greta. It was Mrs. Quill. "The Duke is asking if you are available," Mrs. Quill said. "For what purpose?" "He did not say, my lady." She found him in the library again. It seemed to be where he went when something required him to be in a room with good enough light to think in. He was standing at the center of it this time, not at the window, not at the shelves, just standing there. He looked, she thought, like a man who had just finished a difficult conversation and had not yet decided what to do with the aftermath of it. "You saw her arrive," he said. "Yes. I would like to explain." "You are not required to explain anything to me," she said. "The terms between us do not include that." "I'm explaining anyway," he said. She sat down without being asked. Something about his tone told her this would not be short. He sat too. He put his hands flat on the table, the way he had in their first meeting, and he looked at them for a moment before looking at her. "Mrs. Halvett and I have had an arrangement for the better part of a year," he said. She understood what it was. I understood what it was. It was honest in its dishonesty, if that makes any sense. He paused. "I have ended it this morning." Drusilla kept her expression still. "Why?" "Because it was not fair to continue it," he said, "and because it would not be fair to you." She looked at him carefully. "You ended a private arrangement out of fairness to a woman you acquired through a debt contract?" He held her gaze. "Yes." "Why?" The word sat between them. He did not answer immediately, and she found she was watching him more intently than she had intended. "Because you are not what I expected," he said, finally, "and I have not handled this well. And ending that arrangement was the one honest thing I could do today. Without renegotiating an entire situation neither of us can walk away from." The room was quiet. Outside, clouds moved across the sun, and the library shifted from light to shadow and back again in slow, easy waves. "You could have not told me," she said. "I am aware. It would have been simpler. Also aware." She folded her hands in her lap. "Thank you for telling me." He looked at her in a way she was becoming almost familiar with, that particular quality of attention he gave her that felt different from how she imagined he looked at everything else. Thorough, like he was trying to understand something about her that kept not resolving into a simple answer. "Mrs. Halvett was not angry," he said. "She said she had expected it." "She sounds like a sensible woman." "She is," he said. "She said to tell you, if I spoke to you about it, that she bore you no ill feeling." Drusilla blinked. "She said that?" "She did." She thought about this, about a woman who could end something with grace intact and send a message of good faith to the stranger who had, indirectly, ended it. "I think I would like her very much," she said, more to herself than to him. Something in his face shifted. Just slightly. It might have been the beginning of something that, in different circumstances, could have been called warmth. Then Miss Otley walked in without knocking, which Drusilla had already identified as her consistent habit, and sat down in the third chair at the library table as though she had been invited. "Mrs. Quill told me you were both in here," she said. "I have something to say, and I thought it better to say it to both of you at once." The Duke looked at her with the expression he reserved for Otley, which was somewhere between patience and exasperation. "This is not a committee, Otley." "It should be," she said. "My lady." She turned to Drusilla. "I have been coming to this house since I was 14 years old. My father and the Duke's father were friends. I know this house better than anyone except Mrs. Quill, and I know Caius Greyhollow better than his brother does, which Prentice would argue, but which is simply true." She folded her hands on the table in an uncanny echo of Drusilla. "You are both being careful with each other, which is understandable, but you are being careful in ways that are going to create problems if they go on." "Otley," the Duke said. "He does not speak about important things," she said to Drusilla, ignoring him completely. "He decides instead. He solves instead. It is efficient, and it is also why you are both sitting in this library with this particular uncomfortable energy between you." She looked at the Duke. "Tell her about the will." The room changed. Drusilla felt it change, saw it in the way the Duke's hands tensed slightly on the table, saw it in the way Otley's expression went steady and serious and stopped performing confidence. "Otley," the Duke said again, very quietly. "She will find out," Otley said. "Let her find out from you." Silence. Drusilla looked at the Duke. He looked at the table, then at her. "My father's will," he said. "It is not a simple document. There is a clause in it that my solicitor has recently informed me may be relevant to the current arrangement." He paused. "If I die without a living male heir, the title and the estate do not pass to Prentice. They pass to a distant cousin named Lord Breck Sutwell, who has made it clear in every available forum that he intends, if he inherits, to dissolve the Thornfeld holdings and sell the land in parcels." Drusilla understood immediately. "The tenant families." 47 families, he said, living on Thornfeld land. Some of them for 3 generations. Breck Sutwell has no interest in people. He has interest in what the land is worth empty. She sat with the full weight of that. 47 families. She had come here for 17. And this man, this cold, armored, complicated man across the table, was carrying 47 the same way she had carried 17, and had said nothing, and had still shown up at her door and presented it as a contract. "Why did you not tell me this at the beginning?" she asked. "Because it would have sounded like additional manipulation," he said. "You already had no real choice. Telling you there were 47 more lives depending on the outcome felt like piling on." She stared at him. "So you protected me from information that would have helped me understand you," she said. He said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Miss Otley watched them both with the expression of someone who has lit a fire and is now observing whether it provides heat or burns something down. Drusilla stood. She walked to the window and looked out at the grounds. The sun was fully out again now, and the hills were bright and open and indifferent to every complicated human thing happening inside these walls. 47 families, 17 of her own. A man who had constructed an entire iron exterior around something that was, underneath, not iron at all. A brother who felt guilty. A woman in the village who sent messages of good faith to strangers. A sharp-eyed young woman who walked into rooms without knocking and said the things no one else would say. She turned from the window. "I am not going anywhere," she said. Not to reassure him, not to surrender, just as a statement of fact that she wanted clearly understood. "I made a choice, and I keep my choices. But if we are doing this, we are doing it honestly. No more protected information. No more decisions made on my behalf, without my knowledge. Whatever else this arrangement is, it will not also be a blindfold. The Duke looked at her for a long moment. "Agreed," he said. Same word as before. Same clean, uncomplicating agreement. But this time, something in the way he said it was different. This time it sounded less like compliance. It sounded closer to relief. Miss Otley stood, smoothed her skirt with great satisfaction, and said, "Good. Now I would like tea, and I suggest we all have some, because Lord Prentice has just arrived back from the village with a look on his face that means he has done something requiring a calm response from everyone involved." As if on cue, they heard Prentice's voice in the corridor, talking fast and slightly too loud, with the particular energy of someone who has either found a solution or created a problem, and is not yet sure which. Drusilla looked at the Duke. The Duke looked at Drusilla. For the first time, in that quiet, shared look across the library table, something passed between them that was not a term, not a condition, not a careful measure of distance. It was something much smaller and much more dangerous than any of that. And neither of them said a word about it. Lord Prentice had done something requiring a calm response. He had gone to the village to collect a package from the postal office, which was a simple enough errand, and had somehow managed to return with the information that a journalist from a London publication had arrived at the village inn 2 days ago, asking questions about the Duke of Thornfeld's sudden marriage to the widow of Lord Fenmore. Not general questions, specific ones, the kind that suggested someone had already provided a framework and the journalist was filling in details. Prentice delivered this news in the library doorway with the breathless energy of a man who genuinely could not tell whether he was the bearer of disaster or the hero who had caught it early. The Duke was very still when he heard it. "Who sent him?" Drusilla asked. "That," Prentice said, "is the part that is going to require a calm response." He looked at his brother. His questions were specifically about the terms of the arrangement, the debt, the conditions, the timeline. He paused. The word he used, to at least 2 people in the village, was contract. The word sat in the room like something dropped from a height. Only 4 people knew the precise terms. The Duke, Drusilla, Prentice, and the Duke's solicitor, a man named Mr. Thrace, who operated out of a quiet office in the city and had drawn up the original documents with Lord Fenmore 6 years ago, and the amended terms 3 weeks ago. Drusilla watched the Duke's face. She watched him move through the information, the way she had seen him move through a room, quickly and thoroughly. And she watched the moment he arrived at the conclusion, because his jaw tightened just slightly, and then released. "Thrace has a junior partner," he said. "Newly appointed," Prentice confirmed. "Been in the position for 4 months. And ambitious, presumably." "Apparently so." Drusilla leaned forward. "What does this journalist intend to publish?" "Nothing yet," Prentice said. "But if he publishes the terms, the specific terms, the language of it, the wording about heirs and timelines, it will not read well." "No," she said. "It will not." She thought about that, about what it would look like in print, about the women in the county who would read it and understand immediately what had been asked of her, about Beatrice reading it in the Fenmore parlour, about Hesse and Old Pert and Mrs. Pottle, who had trusted her to go and handle this quietly and come back to them intact. She stood. "I will speak to him," she said. Both men looked at her. "The journalist," she said. "I will go to the village and speak to him directly." not as someone who has something to hide, as someone who has something to say. That is not a good idea, the Duke said. It is a better idea than waiting for him to write whatever he has been sent here to write, she said. A story told first by the subject is harder to reframe. A story told only by a source with motives is very easy to twist. She looked at the Duke. Do you trust me to handle it? A pause. Not long, but real. Yes, he said. She went to the village the next morning with Greta and Mrs. Quill, who had insisted on coming, and whose presence Drusilla had decided was actually useful, because Mrs. Quill had a face that made people feel they were being evaluated for a position they were not sure they wanted. The journalist was a young man named Mr. Petit, perhaps 26, with ink-stained fingers and the alert, slightly hungry look of someone who believed in what he was doing. He was not unkind. He stood when she walked into the inn's front room and removed his hat and looked genuinely startled. She sat across from him at the small table and folded her hands. You have been asking questions about me, she said. My lady, I did not expect you to come yourself. I imagine not, she said. I would like to understand what you intend to write. He was honest, which she had hoped for, and had not been certain of. He told her that he had received a letter, anonymous, outlining the broad terms of what he called a matrimonial arrangement of a coercive nature, and that his publication considered it a matter of public interest. Do you believe it is? She asked. He looked at her carefully. I believe women in your position deserve better than what was described in that letter. So do I, she said. He blinked. I am not here to tell you there is no story, she said. I am here to tell you that the story is more complicated than whoever wrote that letter wanted you to understand. I came to Thornfeld because 17 people depended on my doing so. That was my choice, made with full information and full awareness. She paused. What I will ask you is this. If you publish the terms of a private legal arrangement, obtained through a source with a personal motive to cause damage, you will harm the same woman you are trying to protect. You will also harm 47 tenant families on the Thornfeld estate who have nothing to do with this. He was quiet for a long time. You are asking me not to publish, he said. I am asking you to think carefully about who benefits from the version you have been given, she said, and to consider that there is an alternate version which I am happy to provide on record, if you prefer a story that is true rather than merely scandalous. He looked at his hands, then at her. What is the alternate version? He asked. She told him. Not everything, but enough. She told him about the debt and her choice and what had been at stake. She told him about the conditions she had set and the Duke's agreement to them. She told him about Beatrice and Mrs. Pottle and Old Pert and the farmhands, and she told him that the 47 Thornfeld families existed and had names and children and 3 generations of roots in that land. She did not make the Duke sound like a good man. She made him sound like a complicated one, which was the only honest version available. Mr. Petit listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. The person who wrote to me, he said. Do you know who it was? I have a strong suspicion, she said, but I have no proof, and I will not name someone without it. She did know. She had worked it out the night before, lying awake in the Thornfeld room that was beginning, reluctantly, to feel less foreign. The only person with access to the precise language of the terms, outside of the solicitor's office, and with a motive to expose them, was Lord Breck Sutwell, the distant cousin who stood to inherit everything if no heir was produced, who would benefit enormously from a public scandal that might unravel the arrangement before it reached its conclusion. She said none of this to Mr. Petty, but she filed it carefully. He did not publish the original story. He published a brief and largely neutral piece about the Thornfeld estate's long-standing support of its tenant communities, which mentioned the new Duchess in passing as someone clearly invested in those same communities. It was not a portrait, it was barely a paragraph, but it put her name in the public record in a way that was not a wound. When she returned to Thornfeld that evening, the Duke was waiting in the entry hall. He had clearly not been waiting in the entry hall for any particular reason. He was holding a document and standing near the side table with the particular studied casualness of a man pretending he had happened to be there. "How did it go?" he asked. "Well enough," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "You handled that without any help from me. You gave me your trust," she said. "That was helpful." He was quiet. She walked past him toward the stairs. She was tired, genuinely tired, the kind that came from spending an entire morning choosing every word carefully and managing her own face while doing it. "Lady Fenmore." She stopped on the second step and turned. He was still standing at the bottom of the stairs, the document in his hand, looking up at her. The entry hall light was behind him, and she could not read his expression fully. But she could hear something in his voice that she hadn't heard before. Something unguarded. "Thank you," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "You are welcome, Caius." And she did not realize until she had turned away and continued up the stairs that she had used his given name for the first time, and that he had not said a word about it. She was almost certain he had not minded. That night, Lord Breck-Sutwell's letter arrived. The letter was addressed to the Duke, but delivered to the whole household in effect, because it was written in the kind of language that assumed itself an audience. Lord Breck-Sutwell was 52 years old, lived in the northern part of the county, in a house he had inherited from his mother, and had, by every account Drusilla had gathered from Greta's kitchen intelligence, spent the better part of the last decade watching the Thornfeld dukedom with the focused patience of a man waiting for an inheritance he considered already owed to him. He had heard, the letter said, of the Duke's recent marriage. He offered his congratulations in language so precisely stripped of warmth that it functioned as its opposite. He then noted, with equal precision, that he had taken the liberty of consulting his own solicitor regarding the terms of the late Duke's will, specifically the clauses pertaining to legitimate male heirs and the definition thereof, and had some observations he wished to share at the Duke's earliest convenience. It was a declaration dressed as a courtesy call. Drusilla read it over the Duke's shoulder at the breakfast table the next morning, which she only realized she had done when she straightened up and found Prentice watching her from across the table with an expression that was doing its best to be neutral. "He is going to contest the arrangement," she said. "He is going to try," the Duke said. "On what grounds?" "He will find some," Prentice said. "Breck-Sutwell has spent money on solicitors the way other men spend money on horses. It is his primary leisure activity." The Duke set the letter down. He looked at it for a moment, the way a man looks at something he has been waiting for, and is not surprised by, but is tired of nonetheless. He will argue that any heir produced under the current terms is invalid, that the arrangement itself is irregular. He will try to tie it in procedural language until something unravels. Drusilla sat back down in her chair. She picked up her tea. She thought. "He also sent the journalist," she said. The Duke looked at her. "You are certain?" "Not in a way that would hold up in a legal room," she said. "But the timing, the precision of the language used, the choice to do it anonymously, it points to someone who wanted to create a public record of scandal before any heir could be legitimized." a prevention rather than a response. Prentice had gone very still. If that is true, he planned this before you even arrived. Yes, she said, which means he has been watching the Thornfeld situation closely enough to move the moment Caius did. Which means, she said, that we need to move faster and more clearly than he anticipated. The Duke looked at her. There was something in that look she had stopped trying to categorize, because every time she assigned it a name, it shifted into something more. It was not an admiration, exactly. It was something that looked like a man realizing, over and over, that the person across from him was not who he had originally assessed, and finding the revision more significant each time. "What are you proposing?" he asked. "I am proposing that we stop managing this quietly and start managing it visibly," she said. "Breck Sutwell's strategy depends on isolation and obscurity. He wants the details of this arrangement to remain murky enough that he can reinterpret them. The answer to that is clarity. Public, consistent, undeniable clarity about what this household is and who is in it." "You want to be seen," Prentice said. "I want us to be seen," she said. "Together. Functioning. Present in this community in ways that leave no procedural gap for a man with a solicitor and too much patience." The Duke was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "The county assembly is in 3 weeks." "Then we attend," she said. They attended, and the county assembly, it turned out, was where everything that had been quietly building for 6 weeks finally came into the open air. Thornfeld had not sent a representative to the county assembly in 4 years, not since the first Duchess died. The Duke's absence had been noted, accepted, and eventually folded into the general understanding that Grey Hollow was a man who had withdrawn from the social life of the county and intended to remain withdrawn. His arrival with his new Duchess therefore created a response that was not subtle. Drusilla had prepared herself for scrutiny. What she had not fully prepared for was the particular quality of it, not hostile, not exactly warm, but intensely curious in the way that only very small, very interconnected communities can manage. Every eye in that assembly room tracked them when they entered. Every conversation adjusted. She kept her posture easy and her expression open, and she moved through the room the way she had learned to move through difficult situations, not aggressively forward and not retreating, just present. She spoke to the vicar's wife, who turned out to be genuinely pleasant once separated from her funeral condolences. She spoke to 2 of the tenant family representatives, men named Goss and Aldbury, who looked at her with a cautious hope that she recognized, because it was the same look Mrs. Pottle had given her on the morning she left Fenmore. She spoke to everyone who approached her, and she approached several people who had not yet come to her, and she did all of it in a way that said simply, clearly, without a single stated word, "I am here. I am staying. This is real." The Duke stayed close, not hovering, not managing her, just close enough that the picture was clear. At one point during the evening, he brought her a glass of water without being asked, and when he handed it to her, their fingers did not touch, but his eyes did something that her heart responded to before her mind had a chance to intervene. She was quiet on the inside for a moment. Then she was busy talking to someone else. Lord Breck Sutwell was not at the assembly, but 3 of his associates were, and Drusilla noticed them noticing her, and she made sure that what they saw was worth reporting back. A woman at home in this room, a woman who knew the names of the tenant families and the concerns of the local vicar and the pruning opinions of the groundskeeper, a woman who was not a transaction, a woman who was a presence. On the way home in the carriage, the Duke and Drusilla sat across from each other in the dark, and for a while neither spoke. The sound of the wheels on the road and the movement of the carriage through the night were the only things filling the space between them. Then he said, "Sutwell's associates will report to him by tomorrow." "Let them," she said. "You were remarkable there." She looked at him. In the carriage dark, she could see only the outline of him, the set of his shoulders, the line of his jaw. "I was myself," she said. "That is all I know how to be." "I know," he said. "That is what I meant." The silence that followed was different from the earlier ones. Not careful. Not managed. Just two people in a moving carriage in the dark, sitting with something neither of them was quite ready to name, and both of them were done, pretending they could not feel. "I was wrong about a great many things," he said finally. "You were," she agreed. "I cannot undo the way this started." "No," she said. "You cannot. But I can choose what it becomes," he said, "if you are willing." She looked at him across the dark space of the carriage. She thought about the woman who had sat in the cold kitchen at Fenmore holding a prayer card. She thought about 17 lives and 47 more, and a letter sealed in black wax, and a man who had walked into her parlour like he owned the world and had turned out, slowly and reluctantly, and against what appeared to be his own best efforts, to be someone she could not stop thinking about. She thought about Theodora and grief, and the ways people armour themselves against their own worst memories. She thought about what Prentice had said, that Caius was not always like this. She thought about who he was becoming. "I am willing," she said. "But understand something. I did not come here to be a vessel. I came here as a person, with my own grief and my own intelligence, and my own sense of what I am worth. If we are choosing what this becomes, we are choosing it equally. You do not decide the shape of it alone." He held her gaze in the dark. "I would not want to," he said. She believed him, not because he was easy to trust, but because she had watched him for 6 weeks, and she had learned to read the difference between what he performed and what he meant. And right now, in this carriage, he was not performing anything. 3 weeks later, Lord Breck Sutwell's solicitor filed a formal challenge with the county legal office, contesting the validity of the Thornfeld matrimonial arrangement and its associated heir succession terms. The Duke's legal response, filed 4 days later, was 27 pages long and had been prepared in significant part by Drusilla herself, who had spent 3 evenings at the library table with Mr. Thrace's senior documents, a fresh candle, and her own clear mind, finding the places where the language of the original will could be read not as Sutwell wanted it read, but as it had actually been written. She found 4 of them. Mr. Thrace, when presented with her notes, looked at them for a long time, and then said, in the tone of a man who does not give compliments casually, "This is very good work, my lady." "It is accurate work," she said. "That is the main thing." The challenge was ultimately unsuccessful. Prentice threw a small celebration dinner, which turned into a larger one, when Miss Otley arrived uninvited with 2 bottles of something expensive, and the satisfied expression of someone whose confidence in an outcome had been entirely vindicated. Mrs. Quill did not celebrate visibly, but she ordered the good table linens, which was the same thing. Greta wept briefly and happily in the kitchen, and then pulled herself together and helped Hesse, who had made the trip from Fenmore for the occasion, set the table with the efficient teamwork of 2 women who had found an immediate understanding. Beatrice came too. She arrived the morning of the dinner, and stood in the Thornfeld entry hall, and looked at Drusilla with the careful eyes of a woman trying to assess whether her niece by marriage was all right in the real and specific sense, not the polite one. Drusilla looked back at her steadily. "You look different," Beatrice said. I am different, Drusilla said. I am still myself. But I have been through something, and it changed the shape of certain things. I am all right, Beatrice. Truly. Beatrice looked at her for another long moment. Then she looked past her at the Duke, who was standing a respectful distance down the corridor, with the particular stillness of a man who understood that this was not his moment and did not try to make it one. Beatrice looked at him for a good while. Then she said to Drusilla quietly, "Does he deserve you?" Drusilla considered this honestly. "Not yet," she said, "but he is trying, and he knows it." Beatrice looked at him one more time. He met her gaze directly and did not look away. She turned back to Drusilla. "All right," she said. "Just that. All right." At dinner, the table was full and loud and warm in a way that Thornfeld had apparently not been for a long time. Prentice told a story that was probably only half true and entirely entertaining. Miss Otley argued with him through most of it, and was right about 3/4 of her objections. Mr. Bravell explained something about the north pasture fencing to Beatrice, who listened with genuine interest. Greta and Hesse brought dishes out in perfect coordination. Seg had been invited and sat at the far end of the table, looking slightly overwhelmed and very pleased. The Duke sat at the head of the table and looked down the length of it, at all these people in his house, and something crossed his face that had not been there on the day Drusilla arrived. She caught it. She was watching him in that careful way she had developed, not obviously, just consistently, the way you watch something you have decided to understand fully. He looked down the table and found her watching him, and the thing on his face did not go away. It stayed, and he let it. She did not look away either. Later, after the guests had dispersed to their rooms and the house had settled into its late-night quiet, Drusilla stood at the window of her room and looked out at the Thornfeld hills, dark now and soft under the moonlight, and she thought about a woman who had knelt in cold mud pulling turnips, and a letter sealed in black wax, and a man on a horse surrounded by 12 mounted men who had looked down at her like she was something already decided. She thought about how much had changed since then. She thought about Caius Greyhollow, who had come to her with a contract and no kindness, and had spent 6 weeks becoming someone who handed her a glass of water without being asked, and meant it. That, she thought, looking out at the dark hills of Thornfeld, was the most honest ending she could give to a beginning as dishonest as this one.